20 years doing consultations relatively once a month, just about, before I even moved to California. Great podiatrist, lectures around the world on biomechanics and foot ailments, etc. And so we're really lucky to have him. Really appreciate him being here. Talk is obvious. How many people here, real quick, how many people here are running in Vibram or something very, very minimal or barefoot? So about half the crowd, and the other half is curious. All right, well, without further ado, Dr. Kerber, thank you.
Thank you for having me out here, Pat. I just want to say a little word about my relationship with Fleet Feet. And, Pat's actually kind of a late comer here. I grew up in Sacramento, so I ran from McClatchy High. I actually, when Sally Edwards and Liz Jansen first opened Fleet Feet, they were in that Victorian across the street there, the very first Fleet Feet ever made. I was ending my senior year, starting my freshman year at UC Davis on the Aggies. So, I ran the Boston Marathon with Sally and Liz and the Fleet Feet group back in 1979. So, and then, I came back here to practice in 1985. After doing my training, I set up a relationship with Sally when she was over there, and then eventually Pat, who's a great owner, and Tom Rayner, who owns the group now, is a great store for a lot of people here, and a lot of podiatrists refer people here at Fleet Feet. So I tell you a little bit about myself. Even though I do podiatry, I was a runner. Way before I was a podiatrist, I went to Hollywood Park Elementary School, ran 4th, 5th, 6th grade, Walkie Miller Junior High, which is not even in existence now, ran track cross country, McClatchy High. I ran cross country track. I ran my first marathon at age 17. I ran a 2:39 marathon at age 18 in my senior year of high school. I ran for the Aggies at UC Davis for 4 years. And, I've run a 2:28 marathon. That was back when I had more hair and muscles. I'll show you a picture of me when I actually was pretty fast. So, I'm coming from not just from a sports podiatrist, but as someone who was a competitive runner at one time. And I just want to give you my impression of the barefoot running movement. And especially I want to go through the scientific evidence, because I think when you go on the internet and you hear people talk, especially if people have a financial interest behind the barefoot running or minimalist shoe craze, you tend to get a lot of misinformation. So that's one of the things I'm going to try to say is, what does the science say? What's the evidence? And I'm going to try to bring the research from, I'm sure many of you have non-medical backgrounds. I'm going to try to bring it down to a level where you guys can understand where we are in our knowledge and where we need to go from there. So when we start looking at the history of running, we start seeing that we have to understand, why do we run? And running was an essential activity for our ancestors. We would run for hunting, for food. We would run to escape dangerous animals. We may have run to the nearby community as a messenger. So the ability to run for our ancient ancestors was very helpful. And it was probably helpful for the survival of our ancestors. In ancient culture, when we started looking at the earliest races that were held in recorded history, we saw that the Olympics were held in 776 BC. They were held every 4 years in Olympia. And this track here is actually the site of one of the tracks they had the first races. And there used to be the old Olympics with just one race. And this was a race that was a 2-stade race, 384 meters. So one of the questions becomes, when you start looking at the idea that barefoot running is good or bad, is were man's ancestors really barefoot runners? Well, when we start looking at the ancient Greek vases from over 2,500 years ago, there is depiction of men running, and these are very realistic pictures of the running form, and they are barefoot. So we know that probably the early ancestors, at least 2,500 years ago, were running barefoot, because this is the way they're depicted on these ancient vases. Another question comes. There's a concern that we as runners have lived so many years barefoot and so many generations barefoot that we just recently in shoes. Well, how old are shoes? Well, the oldest shoe in existence was actually found in 1938. It was actually found in a cave in Oregon. This has been radiocarbon dated to 8,000 BC. It's made of woven sagebrush. And if you guys go on the internet, I got all these pictures off the internet. It's amazing how well the shoe was constructed as of, this is 10,000 years ago. So 10,000 years is about 5,000 generations of people who could have been running and walking in these shoes. The oldest leather shoe was found in Armenia dated back to 3,500 BC. These were actually a size 7 women's shoe, and they're actually a very nice construction done of a leather hide with the laces across the top here. And this is an interesting find. Now you got to understand that the old shoes weren't made of rubber. They had to be plant materials or they had to be animal materials. So this is the shoe dating before that. They're probably gone. The shoes have been dissolved by the environment. One interesting study, Eric Trinkhaus, he's actually done his PhD on trying to figure out how old or how long ago did people wear shoes. And his archaeological evidence suggests that as late as 30,000 to 40,000 years ago, people were wearing shoes from looking at the shape of the digits that they were in. So to say that we wore shoes just recently is probably false. We've seen maybe 20,000 generations of humans have been wearing shoes. So there is some suggestion that even our ancient ancestors, if you consider 40,000 years ancient, were shoe wearers. Now, what happens when you take a population that is barefoot versus a population that's shod? And this is an interest, and obviously here, we're not going to find this here in California, but you can go to some other islands where you have shod people versus barefoot people. And what they find is that in the one study that I found on this, is that the barefoot subjects had not only wider feet, but also had lower plantar pressures. And what a plantar pressure is actually the force over surface area. Pressure is like a stress, and so they take the force divided over surface area, that's going to be a pressure, and that's going to be how hard that bottom of the foot hits. And they think that the people who were barefoot had lower pressures because their feet were typically broader and flatter in the arch than the people that were and had more fleshy feet. So that would put the body weight over a larger surface area, which would decrease the pressure. Okay, this brings us to Chris McDougall and Born to Run. I'm sure now, how many people have not read Born to Run? Well, that's about half. Okay, so I'm assuming the other half have read that. Now, Chris McDougall is given credit with sparking this quote-unquote barefoot running revolution. He writes a good book, this book, Born to Run. He talks about this, it chronicles this Tarahumara Indians from the Copper Canyons of Mexico. And Mr. McDougall talks about how great these endurance running Indians are. And he also speculates in the book that this modern cushion running shoe that we sell here at the running shoe stores and has been around for the last 30 years, he thinks is the cause of many of the injuries. And he suggests that maybe we should be running barefoot like our ancestors or running in minimalist type shoes. One of the funny things about Chris McDougall, of course, Chris here is not running barefoot or in minimalist Vibram shoes, but he's wearing a thick sole shoe, which is kind of interesting. But he doesn't like me for some reason. His quote out of his blog says, anyone who runs without shoes is constantly asked about all that dangerous glass out there. Take this comment from Kevin Kirby, the angry podiatrist. Now, do I look angry to you? I'm not angry. I just like people not telling lies in their books. So, and he doesn't like me because I've actually commented publicly on the internet and various magazines and books about how I think his book is not an accurate representation of reality. But anyway, so let's go, and this is a little bit of the history, kind of a fun thing for me because here I'm a runner, grew up here in Sacramento, running all my life, and I've been called an angry podiatrist. Now my kids love that because I got a 28-year-old and a 22-year-old. I told them that they just almost fell on the floor laughing. Angry podiatrist, yeah, that's great. I'm gonna fight that for my life. So let's look at the famous barefoot runners. Probably the most famous barefoot runner of all is Abebe Bikila. Why? Because this guy won the 1960 Rome Marathon while barefoot. His time was 2:15:16. The story was he got there, they didn't have the right size shoe, he had been training barefoot all along, he ran the race barefoot and won the race. So that's a pretty amazing thing. Now, that was 50 years ago. What's interesting though, more further, when you start looking at the difference of shoes versus barefoot, is that 4 years later, he broke his record. He actually ran 7 seconds faster per mile, but he wore shoes. So Abebe Bikila actually, you could say, got faster when he wore shoes versus wore barefoot. So that's a little fact of history, and you guys can check the times. They're 7 seconds per mile faster when he wore shoes. So the other thing that's interesting is that since Abebe Bikila's marathon win in this international marathon, there's not been a single athlete who's won a major international marathon over 50 years barefoot, running the whole thing. Zola Budd. Zola Budd is, those of you who have lost some hair like I have, remember Zola Budd. She was a phenomenal distance runner from South Africa. She ran in 1984, broke the 5,000 meter record. She, unfortunately for girls, she collided with Mary Decker during the 1984 Olympic 3,000 meter race. Decker was taken out of the race. Zola Budd was blamed for it, even though she probably was an accident. And what's interesting about a quote now is that as an older woman, she says, "I no longer run barefoot as I got older because I had injuries to my hamstring. I found that wearing shoes gives me more support and protection from injury." So obviously running barefoot is something that some of the athletes, elite athletes, can do, but these are two, and there's other elite athletes that have done so, but these are the two most marked. Now, we start to talk about this idea of the minimalist shoe, and this is just has started in the last 2 or 3 years. This is a shoe that is going to either have a lower heel height, but it's also going to be a thinner sole shoe. Now, obviously, part of the classic minimalist shoe that they then sell here at Fleet Feet is the Vibram FiveFinger. This Vibram FiveFinger shoe. Vibram is an Italian company, and they actually, the story was they actually designed this shoe to be used as a yacht or boat shoe because they could grip the surface of the boat, have their toes out, and then, you know, it's kind of a cool shoe to walk around. I've walked around these things. But they're saying, well, this is a good alternative to people who can't really run barefoot because it's too hard out there, so let's try the Vibram. Vibram is, I think, on Amazon now, #7 selling shoe on Amazon. Incredible. So this shoe has just exploded in popularity. Well, when you start looking at the Vibram FiveFinger website, and I'm sorry to show you this picture here, this is straight from the Vibram website. They're really into good marketing. What's in there, you've got to pay attention. On that page, you look at their feet. They're wearing Vibrams. Okay? They're wearing Vibrams. This is their marketing for their shoes, and we should be natural. And they have these naked people on the website, and it's right on there. You can click on the woman's leg here and zoom right into it if you want to, for those who like to do that sort of, or the man. So you guys can do that. I'm just showing you. Go on and type in, I think it's Barefoot Technology or something like that. This is all from the internet. What's funny about the Vibram FiveFinger, what's funny for the people wearing it, we've seen a rise in incidence of metatarsal stress fractures. In fact, this is taken from the Runner's World Forum of 7/29/2010. This guy named Downtown Runner, he says this camel for his stress fracture is what he calls his current minimalist footwear. So, you know, it's obviously, these shoes are okay for some people, but some people get injured, and this is kind of what I'm trying to do, is trying to show you the approach that we look at as sports podiatrists and why we recommend certain shoes versus others. Well, another idea is, are these minimalist shoes really a new idea? I mean, if you look at the Barefoot web pages, they say, oh, these minimalist shoes, those Nike and Asics, they're all out to get us because they're making thick sole shoes trying to injure us. Well, are these minimalist shoes really something new? Pat and I both ran a lot back in the 70s, and we know what the shoes were like. This shoe, the 1972 Nike Marathoner, is about as thin as you can get. This was what was present back. This is almost 40 years old. And so these shoes were very thin. As a matter of fact, they even had almost like a Vibram FiveFinger shoe coming out of the parent company for Asics. Onitsuka Tiger, for those who don't know, was the parent company for Asics. They changed over to the name of being Asics in 1976, I believe. These thin-sole marathon shoes with a toe cleft were first made by Onitsuka Tiger in 1951. What's even more interesting is that this guy, Shigeki Tanaka, 19-year-old who survived the Hiroshima blast, won the 1951 Boston Marathon in a time of 2:27, and look at his shoe. He's wearing, how about that? He wore a what they call a Tabi shoe, made by Onitsuka Tiger, very thin sole racing shoe. This was about the only racing shoe out of Japan during the time. So this was, how many years ago? 60 years ago. Thin sole shoes with a toe cleft. So it's really interesting. These are some of my favorite shoes. Actually, my very first marathon I ran in 1974, it's called Ocean Bay Marathon. I went from Half Moon Bay to Belmont. I was the first junior, so I actually won a pair of shoes because I was first junior. That was a shoe I won. Great racing flat, very thin sole. You were to take this Onitsuka Tiger Jayhawk and give it to the minimalist crowd. They say, oh, it's a great minimalist shoe. No, this is a racing flat. It's what we call racing flats. And racing flats have been around since how long? 1972, you could say 1951. They've been around all that time. So, do we need to call them minimalist shoes? Well, it's up to you guys. You can call them minimalist if you want to, but as far as I'm concerned, they're still racing flats. So, here's some of the racing I did. This is me when I had more muscles than here. This guy, Jim Howard. These are pictures from my Aggie, my running years. This is my actual cross-country race. I actually do photography for the team. This guy, Jim Howard, ran at Elk Grove High. He won the Western States 100-mile run in 1977. This guy, John Marino, ran for San Francisco State. These pictures were taken by about 1977. He won the San Francisco Marathon in 1978. So, you know, the guys I ran with at Davis, I mean, these were the top guys in Northern California. So I wasn't running with Sanjay, I wasn't as fast as those guys. But this is the type of people that I was running with. And running in that level kind of changes your opinion as to what we should do or not. Because back in these days, back when I was at Davis, we would run barefoot. We would run mile repeats around the baseball field, a third of a mile. And one of the guys take our shoes, oh, let's take our shoes today, and we'll run barefoot. And no big deal. I mean, a lot of the college runners back then ran barefoot because it was a nice break. When you're running 70 to 85 miles a week, doing double workouts, and you're racing every week, it's nice to have a break. Sometimes a coach will put us in a swimming pool. Just say, no workout, you guys are all tired, go in the swimming pool and swim. So the barefoot running was a great deal. I enjoyed it, and all the rest of the guys enjoyed it. But this is the type of running that we did, and it kind of influenced how I think about barefoot running and when it should be used and when it shouldn't be used. I'm not going to belabor you on the running gait cycle. I teach biomechanics to podiatry students and other podiatrists, but basically in running, it's different from walking than running. We always there's a time during the gait phase where we have both feet off the ground, and that's called the double float phase. But our foot hits the ground at foot strike, so it's hitting the ground at foot strike, mid support, and then toe off, and then we propel ourselves to the next step, and this is the running gait cycle. One of the things we start seeing, and again, a lot of these blogs and a lot of the different running clinics now, is they're saying, well, you know, you shouldn't heel strike. It's really bad to heel strike because these heel strikers get the injuries. They have too much shock going through them. You need to run on your midfoot or forefoot. Well, let's look at actually the scientific research on that question. There are 753 runners analyzed in this paper from 1983. Now, this was a recreational race. It was some elites and some, average runners. But out of those, 81% were rear-foot strikers, 19% were midfoot strikers, and 0% were forefoot strikers. Now, this is actually high-speed cinematography done in the mid-portion of the race. There's only 2 studies that have been done that published. There's a third one on the way that I know about, but I can't tell you the results of that. I know the results, but it's in that same range. What's even more interesting, we know that the faster runners are more in their midfoot and forefoot, because as you run faster and faster and enter into a sprinting speed, you're going to be more in your forefoot. That's just the natural thing. As you run slower, you're going to be more of a rear-foot striker. In this study done in Japan in 2007, they took 283 elite international runners. They analyzed them at the 2/3 way mark of a half marathon and found again 75% rear-foot strikers, only 24% midfoot strikers, and only 1% were forefoot strikers. So even in the elites, they're rear-foot striking. So if someone tells you that the elites all run midfoot, you can say, well, that's a bunch of you-know-what. It's not true. The truth is that even the elites are the vast majority of rear-foot strikers, and the new study that hasn't been published yet, that will be published, is showing greater than 80% rear-foot strikers for average runners. So when we started looking at the Boston Marathon for 2010 in slow motion, we started looking how they landed. Midfoot strike, rear heel strike, heel strike, midfoot strike. These are the leaders at the 2010 Boston Marathon. Heel strike. These are the leaders. Heel strike.
Amazing.
That's Rosie Ruiz on our bike track.
Great
Now, do you
picture.
guys know who Rosie Ruiz is?
Yes.
Who doesn't know about Rosie Ruiz? I'll tell you the story. She was, I don't know what year was Rosie Ruiz. Rosie Ruiz was a lady who came across the finish line first in the Boston Marathon. That was about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh,
She had started the race, got into a car, drove to near the finish, crossed the finish line, and was trying to get, and she actually, so when you talk about Rosa Ruiz, to any runner who's been around, that's the definition of a cheater. She had tried to win the marathon without it. Anyway, so that's really, so this is just, I want to show you, this isn't even a representation of all runners, I just want to show you that even the elite guys, some of them are rear-foot strikers. And this is actually, these videos are taken from this guy's Run Blogger. So if you guys want to go on this website, he has all these videos on his website. It's the Run Blogger website, excellent. But this video shows him running, oops, there you go, barefoot, Vibrams. Here is in the Nike Free, and here is in a traditional thicker sole running shoe, just showing the different stripe patterns. Again, what the tendency is that when you have a thicker heeled shoe, you're going to tend to be more of a heel striker. And as you get more into the barefoot and the Vibram situation, you're going to be more of a midfoot and forefoot striker. It's just the inclination of the heel of the shoe that is like that.
Question.
Yes?
Is it true that you would use less energy in mid to forefoot as a mid to forefoot striker?
Good question. We'll get to that just a little
Okay.
bit. So, she's leading me right on into my next topic. We're going to talk about energy, and we're going to talk about mechanics of barefoot versus shod running. And this, you know, I'm not trying, what I want to do, I know you can kind of tell that I get a little excited about this stuff, but you know, I see so much misinformation on the internet. I hear it when I come here to the clinic. Now, I want you guys to get the good science here, because this is when I lecture, I don't ever lecture to lay people. I lecture to podiatrists. In fact, I'm debating one of the world's leading researchers on barefoot running in Long Beach. She's a friend of mine, Irene Davis. Irene's a great friend of mine. She asked me to debate her, so we get to debate high-level stuff. But this is fun for me, because you guys are really the guys who are going to be taking this home with me. So, the thin-soled, lightweight running shoes, which I call racing flats, and now they're called minimalist shoes, they've been around for over 30 years, and the popular media has obviously drummed this up, because anything that the media finds is different, they like to say, hey, let's go ahead and, you know, let's drum this up, it sounds neat, this guy, hey, you know, you're a barefoot runner, how's it help you? But when we start looking at the scientific research literature, what does it actually say as regards to barefoot versus shod running? The biggest thing, it seems to be, is that no one disagrees with this. When you run barefoot versus shod running, and shod running means with shoes, is that you're going to take shorter strides. The stride frequency will increase. When I say stride frequency, that means how many steps per mile are you taking, or how many steps per minute are you taking. And also the thought is that the reason that barefoot runners take a shorter stride and increase their stride frequency versus a shod runner running the same pace is that they're trying to avoid heel impact. Because running barefoot on a hard surface, especially asphalt, cement, a hard dirt, if you run barefoot, you're going to hurt your heels. So they will modify their foot strike pattern to avoid heel contact and try to run more of their midfoot and their forefoot. Now that's just a kind of a self-preservation mechanism, because barefoot running, if you've ever tried running barefoot, is that unless you're running on grass, now on grass I used to be able to run heel contact without a problem, but you know, if you're trying to run on asphalt or cement barefoot, most people are going to land on the forefoot just to save their heels, because heel impact can hurt. And how do they do that? The way they do that is they, what we call pre-activate calf muscles. Now the gastrocnemius and soleus muscles, those are the two largest calf muscles. Those are the big bulge, the one that have the big bulge on the back of the calf, they attach to the Achilles tendon. So the electromyographic studies, where they actually can put electrical sensors on the muscle and measure how that they're how they're firing, is that when you switch from the shod running to the barefoot situation, you fire those calf muscles early. That brings the forefoot down to the ground sooner, so you can avoid heel contact and have a more comfortable stride when you're running barefoot. The research also shows that this heel fat pattern. Here's an x-ray, or this is actually a cross-sectional MRI scan of the heel. So here's the bottom of the heel, here's the Achilles tendon, here's the ankle bone called the tatus and the calcaneus. Is that heel fat pad is a nice thickness, and we use that heel fat pad to cushion ourselves. And the heel fat pad deformation is 60.5 in barefoot, whereas in running it's like 35%. Running in shoes is 35%. So this is further evidence that probably what happens in shoes, we have enough protection that we feel like we can hit the heel first if we want to, whereas in barefoot running, most people avoid it, especially if you're running on harder surfaces.
What does it mean, the deformation? Is that specific?
Oh, I'm sorry.
How's that
So
defined?
crunching. Deformation, just compression.
Okay, 60% compression?
Yeah, if you took, so basically, if
Wow.
you 60.5, so that means if you had a 100 millimeter,
Got it.
and it would go down to 39.5, whereas, now these were, the thing about this research though, they actually had the barefoot runners run on their heels, see, so it's a little unnatural, but it just kind of shows you that the shoe is offering some protection. The other thing that, and this seems to be a constant we see in the research, 6 studies that have studied barefoot running, shows that the impact loading rate is actually increased in barefoot running. And here we look at, here's the 2 curves, and this is again, this is ground reaction force, and that's the force that you're hitting the ground. We have a force plate, and we measure the force, and this is the impact peak here, and then this is so that's when the heel hits the ground here, then this peak is when the whole foot comes over the body. Is that we see in barefoot the impact peak occurs sooner and the line is more vertical, so that means the rate of loading is increased. So that means that it's a firmer shock when they hit barefoot than when they load with the shoes on. Also, studies show that barefoot running will increase the tibial vertical acceleration in one study. Again, now you can go back to the literature and find studies where the barefoot runners hit softer. And this is part of the difficulty of looking at this research, because in the research, it really depends on how the researchers did the study. And this is true of all scientific research, is that we have to be careful in reading these papers whether this is something that is the barefoot running been done to the patients the way the patient wants, or the subject wants to run it? Are they on a treadmill? Are they on a hard surface? Have they been a barefoot runner? Are they a trained barefoot runner, or someone who's a shod runner who's just starting to barefoot run again? See, so this is what makes it difficult in analyzing any of this research, is that we have a difficulty. The people on one side, the barefoot side, will say, well, look, that was done wrong. And the people on the shod side will say, well, this is, that's okay. Really, there's not enough research under our belts quite yet to make definite conclusions. I'm just trying to present some of the opposite anti-barefoot stuff, because I feel like we're getting a lot. There's been so much stuff written that barefoot's great and everyone should be doing it, that I want to present the research and show the studies that didn't show that. Now, one thing that's on the pro-barefoot side that I've learned, and I'm actually is real interesting, is that what we're seeing is that the studies is that when people run barefoot, they actually seem to have less force or less moment arm, rather it's lever arm for the force from the ground acting at the knee actually tends to be decreased in shod running. The one thing they found with shod running when wearing shoes is that they were able to propel off their foot easier because the shoe was stiffer, and so when they pushed off the foot, the tip of the shoe was longer than their foot bending, but they actually found that the knee had a shorter moment arm. Moment arm means a lever arm. In other words, the force from the ground acting across the knee would tend to be increased in shoes, which would mean there would be more load across the knee in running in shoes. So this may be one reason that if you're having chronic knee pain, you want to switch over to try a minimalist shoe. Because there's many, in fact, Irene Davis, who's a friend of mine, and other runners who have experienced this have noticed that and other patients I've had have said that, when I add a heel lift to their shoe, sometimes their knee pain gets worse, and as I drop the heel of their shoe, their knee pain gets better. So this is something I think is going to require further research to understand. We also show that in barefoot running that we tend to have, some studies are showing that the pronation is worse in barefoot running, but we also see some studies that show that barefoot running didn't increase what's called internal tibial rotation. In other words, internal tibial rotation is when the foot pronates, the whole leg will go inward or internally rotate. There seems to be half the studies showing that the tibia does internally rotate more in barefoot running, and other studies that don't. So it's really, the pronation thing isn't too black and white yet. So I think it's going to depend on if the patient hits forefoot first, if they hit rear foot first. When you put a shoe on, it makes it difficult also. When you put shoes on, it makes it difficult because to put the markers on the foot, you have to put it in the shoe and cut holes in the shoe to see the markers. And so that's another technical issue that we have difficulties with.
What's ITR?
I'm sorry?
Oh, I just saw some language there, ITR? That last?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, internal tibial rotation.
Oh,
I'm
my
sorry, I didn't
goodness.
explain that. Internal tibial rotation. Then, so explain that again, is that when the foot pronates, so let's say my right foot's hitting the ground, and it pronates or rolls inward, that's going to bring the knee and the tibia internal. And so what they can do to measure internal tibial rotation, what they do is they'll put a marker set on the tibia. They'll actually put a set of like a little cluster of balls that are reflective. And then they have a three-dimensional system, video system, generally 4 or 5 cameras that are tied to a computer. So they can actually track those balls in space during the running. And that's how they do. I mean, you guys have seen the basketball games where they have the guys doing realistic movements. To those, they put them in bodysuits with all these markers on them, and they track them, and that's how they get those realistic movements. It's called 3D kinematics or 3D motion analysis, and this is the way they're doing all these studies now in the last 10 or 15 years. So, getting to your question on metabolic efficiency. Now that's real interesting because this is where I think barefoot running has clear superiority over shoes. Is that this, and this study just came out, it's actually not even, you probably have a print. So this study is from the International Journal of Sports Medicine. It's not been published yet, but it's on it's in the paper showing that these guys they ran 10 runners with shoes and barefoot. And they measured the perceived exertion, they measured the heart rate, and they measured the oxygen uptake. Oxygen uptake is where you have to basically measure the oxygen, the carbon dioxide exhaled. And this is when I was a physiology major at UC Davis. I worked in the exercise lab at UC Davis a lot. So I was involved in studies like this. In fact, one of the studies I was involved in, which is kind of gross, it was on, you guys are laughing, you know, kind of studies you do in the exercise lab. It was a skin and core temperature measuring. So actually, I was running for an hour and 15 minutes on a treadmill in a hot, humid room with skin thermometers on and with a rectal probe measuring for at about a 6:30 mile pace.
Oh, that's
Which
wonderful.
was part of the study to measure my core. That's how you measure core temperature. So that was a lot of fun. That was when I was...
What do they pay you for that? $1 an hour?
Yeah, that believe me, they didn't pay me for that one. You know, it was I'm really interested in science, so this is, you know, this is,
That's dedication.
you know, little thin little thing, and that was a great experience. But anyway, but I'm telling you, this is what the research is all about. Is that you're studying, you know, different physiological and biomechanical processes in the runners and trying to understand what's happening from a scientific aspect. But let me go on just to be able to answer your question. The cost of the running, now some people say, well, how do shoes add to the energy expenditure? Because when we move our foot forward during the swing phase, we have extra mass at the end of our legs. So it's just like those of you who play baseball. When you play baseball, swing the bat, before you swing the bat, you put a donut on the bat and you swing and it becomes heavier, right? Think of having swinging something with a weight at the end. It's much harder to swing. That's what happens when we run. We put any weight on our foot. It seems like that all the research is showing that adding masses to shoes makes you less energy efficient because you're carrying more weight. Anyone who has raced, like I did, and many of you in the room have run, you put your thicker sole training shoes to do the heavy training. When you get on the track or you're out there in the road race, you wear a thin, light racing flat. And this has been done for 40 years. It's nothing new. But we did it because we felt faster. Well, it shows that we were faster. We were actually faster because we're carrying less weight. So this is what we did, and this is what the guys, you don't see guys running, the elites in the Boston Marathon running a thick sole shoe. They're wearing the thinnest sole shoe they can wear that's comfortable, that feel they're not going to get injured. So one of the interesting studies, they're actually looking for to see if it's actually the mass effect, adding mass to the legs is the cause of the injury, cause of the lack of the increase in oxygen consumption. And they compared that to running in a diving sock with weights added to it. And they found that the higher metabolic cost was due only to the extra mass added rather than some sort of biomechanical effect from the shoe. So this means that when we run barefoot or run on a thinner shoe or a lighter shoe, we're going to be using less oxygen per mile, which means we're burning less energy, which means that the perceived exertion or the feeling of working hard is going to be lessened as we have a lighter shoe. Now there was a
Follow-up question.
Was there a question? Yes. I can't take too many questions, but I'll take one right now.
If you're just trying to get exercise and not racing, is that a negative?
You can make that. Yeah, you could say if you want to burn more calories, and yeah, you could put weights on your ankles. I wouldn't suggest doing it, but yeah, but yes, it kind of takes away from the pleasure of running. I think for me, I mean, running at age 54 is hard enough versus 24, right? But that's certainly something you could do, and something that back in the old days they used to recommend running with ankle weights. That increased the strength of your legs and make you burn more oxygen. So one of the questions that I have, and this is something that I've actually asked many. I actually went on there's an international biomechanics webpage, and this is a question that I posed to the authorities and the international biomechanics community. If we know that running barefoot is so much more energy efficient because of less mass, why aren't the elites doing it? That's a good scientific question, because you would think that if it's more energy efficient, that you would be seeing the guys hopping in the race, they'd be barefoot, right? I mean, I would think that if that was the only case. So that's the question. Why aren't the elites running barefoot? If you look at all the current world track and field, road racing records, none of them are set barefoot. They're all set in shoes. So obviously the elites know something that maybe we don't know, or maybe the barefoot enthusiasts won't admit to. We know that from all the research, there seems to be no question that when we have less weight on our feet, that we use less oxygen consumption. So why wouldn't a elite not want to have a speed advantage over his fellow runner by taking off his shoes and have the least amount of mass on his feet? So why aren't more elite runners racing barefoot? One of the pieces of research that may answer that question is that they did a study, and these guys are fast. These are 33 track athletes they measured. They measured these guys, and they took the track athletes who are the best on the team and all the ranges, and they're trying to see what was the difference between the fastest athletes and the slowest athletes. They're still, competitive athletes, but some guys were, ahead of the others. What made them faster runners? And the thing that they measured that they found to be a faster runner is that the guys who are faster exerted more force on the ground. So that means that as you run faster and faster, you're going to put more and more pressure between your foot and the ground. So there's more force, more chance for injury. In fact, these guys are running anywhere from a 4:19 mile pace to a 9.01 second 100 meter pace. So these guys were not slouches. So these guys were comparing, that's the range of speeds they had. So the other thing we have to contend with in my business as a sports podiatrist, we have to hear the runners coming in and say they've heard from all their friends that I shouldn't be heel striking. We're going to run differently. We're going to run with a pose method. We're going to run with chi running. We're going to run. They read on the Runner's World website that the slow runners run heel striking and the fast runners run midfoot. So since I want to go straight to the fast side, I forget the slow side, I want to go right straight to midfoot. What does the research show? They actually did a study of this. It took 16 sub-elite triathletes and split those into the pose group. Now the pose running is a running method where they teach you to not run on your rear foot, but to strike on your midfoot. Shorter stride. Teaching you to bring the ground bring the foot underneath your center of gravity when you run, take shorter strides, and the pose method. And this is kind of the pose method. You pose like this, and this is how you're supposed to run. Well, what's interesting about this, they did oxygen cost and found that In the control group, there is no increase in oxygen cost over this 12-week period of training pose, but the people who were trained in pose method, actually, they become less efficient. So they probably went from a heel striking method to this, assuming this new pose method, and found that there's 7.6% increase in the oxygen uptake for a given running speed, whereas the non-pose people show no difference. And one thing the pose did, so their striding decreased and the vertical oscillation, so their up and down movement decreased in the pose method. So this is further evidence of showing that maybe heel striking isn't so bad. I mean, maybe all this stuff we see on the internet and here at the running group sites that you should be a rear foot striker, you should be a midfoot striker, forefoot striker, not a rear foot striker. Well, we're certainly not seeing that in the scientific research. As a matter of fact, one of my friends who does work at Joe Hamill and his group out at the University of Amherst has done what's called a forward dynamics computer study. Forward dynamics computer study, basically what they do, they model the body and they know what the forces and the alignments of the muscles are of the leg, and they try to figure out what's going to be the most energy efficient way to run. Is it rear foot striking or midfoot striking? And their model, which they modeled at a 642 mile pace, and here's the pictures from the paper, they showed that running heel striking was actually 6.3% difference. It was more economical than running midfoot striking. Now, why could that be? Why would heel striking? We heard that heel striking is such a bad thing. Well, possibly heel striking is more efficient because we can take a longer stride when we heel strike. And that's what my feeling is that when you're running and you're trying to lengthen your stride, obviously you don't want to overstride, but you also don't want to shorten your stride or cut your stride down more. So there's going to be that optimal stride length. Some people are going to be naturally rear foot strikers depending on the speed they're going, and other people are going to be naturally midfoot strikers. Some people are going to be forefoot strikers. And this is what we see, and this is what I've seen for the last 30 years of looking at runners and actually being a runner for over 40 years. So is that you're going to have a certain subset of people who tend to naturally select rear foot striking, another subset that select midfoot striking. And I think the biggest mistake is we try to get them out of one natural type of what they do and try to put them in something they're not accustomed to. Now, of course, that's going to depend on the shoe height. If the heel height is increased, they're going to be more of a rear foot striker. If they run in a Vibram where they have no heel height differential, in other words, if forefoot and rear foot height are the same, you're going to have more of those people tend to be a midfoot striker and a forefoot striker. So, I think that the question is, one of the comments, I just gave this lecture at a conference, the biggest conference on the West Coast, Podiatrist conference on the West Coast on Friday, just a few days ago. And I was talking to one of my buddies, we ran together at Podiatrist school, and I said, when I was running, and I was racing, the last thing I thought about was the guy in front of me was here forefoot striking or rear foot striking. I just want to beat him, right? I mean, you know, there's so much being made of this midfoot and forefoot striking stuff that I just kind of laughed at it because I didn't care what the guy behind me was because I was beating him. The guy in front of me, I was just trying to beat him. I could care less how he's putting his heel on the ground. I was trying to get him. So, you know, we kind of laughed at that because that's just the way you think when you're in a race situation. You're not worried about this. And this whole mechanical thing of how you should rear foot strike and forefoot strike, I think is overblown and being taught to death because it's a point of conversation. So, let's ask the question, why would barefoot running limit racing speed? It seems to be the case. We don't see the elites running barefoot in races. We don't see any of, in fact, when you go to the race and you look at the barefoot numbers, how many do you see? You're looking at probably 0.1% of runners at most. California National Marathon, I go watch it every year. Maybe 1 or 2 barefoot runners out of 8,000. Okay. Now, they may be wearing racing flats. Well, that's not barefoot. I mean, Vibram FiveFinger isn't barefoot. That's a quote-unquote barefoot or minimalist shoe. But a true barefoot runner who runs a whole marathon, you don't see him. There's a reason for that, I think. Is it the increased magnitudes of the forces on the foot? These guys are worried about getting injured when they're racing. Now, yeah, they're training barefoot, but getting a race situation where, and there's a big difference between what you do in your training when you race. When you race, it's you know, you're going fast. I mean, when you're racing, that's the whole point of a race is to go faster. And you're putting more force. Why not just wear a thin racing flat and protect your feet and go barefoot? For me, it was a no-brainer because I was always in shoes, so my feet were so tender. I wasn't good at running on anything barefoot other than sand and on grass. Is it a shorter stride length for barefoot makes you? You know, when you're barefoot, you remember all the research shows that barefoot running is done with shorter stride lengths. So the shorter stride length, maybe that's limiting your ability to lengthen your stride and go faster. I don't know. These are the questions I'm asking. We really don't know the answer. Or is it because all these guys are making thousands or maybe $1 million from the shoe companies who are paying them to wear the shoes? That's a valid question. You know, that's not, I mean, you're talking about guys from Kenya and Ethiopia who are probably making more per race than they would make in a whole lifetime from the shoe companies, because they can bring that money back to their villages and support their families for a price and be very wealthy. They just can put on the shoes of the shoe company and run faster. So this is a valid argument for why the elites may be running in shoes. So, does barefoot running prevent or lessen injuries? Well, Chris McDougall sure said, and of course I'm the ankle podiatrist, what do I know? Chris McDougall said, oh yeah, we need to be running the minimalist shoes or barefoot because that's what our ancestors did, that's what the Terra American Indians did, and look, they're not injured. Of course, they weigh 125 pounds. They're not the guys who sit at the desk and weigh 200 pounds and decide they're going to run a marathon by running a 10-mile run every weekend. So no different body mass. No research. There's absolutely not one shred of research that shows barefoot running produces less injuries than shod running. However, there's also no research that shows that shod running or running in shoes produces less injury than barefoot. So we don't know. There hasn't been the prospective research. Prospective research means that we take a group of people and we separate them into barefoot and shod running. We let them run, and at the end of the study, we see who gets most injured. It's ahead, not looking at people who've been injured and say, okay, what were they doing? So this is what we need to do, and this is what is actually going to be currently done, but it's probably going to take 4 or 5 years to really get this answer. So, in summary, what does barefoot running do for us? It's going to result in you taking a shorter stride. It's going to make you run with faster step pattern or increased stride frequency. It's going to make you hit flatter instead of running on your heels. And it's also going to make you pre-activate your calf muscles in order to avoid heel strikes so you land on your forefoot. So it's going to put more load on the forefoot and less load on the rear foot. So, running injuries, are they going to be changed? Well, they may, but you're just going to be trading one injury for another. When you run on the heel strike pattern with a shoe, you're going to get one set of injuries. You run in minimalist shoes, you're going to get another set of injuries. You run barefoot, you're going to get another set of injuries. Because why? Because when you hit the ground and running, you're hitting the ground with 2 to 3 times body weight, whereas in walking, you're only hitting the ground with 1.25 times body weight. So when you run, you're hitting the ground twice as hard. And if you're 25 pounds overweight, that means you're hitting the ground 50 pounds higher with each step than if you were run with a normal body weight. Now I'm looking around the room here. I don't see guys who are fat, but when I'm at my office, I'm seeing a lot of guys and women who are running to lose weight. And why do we have this high injury rate? Well, I think that's a lot of it because Americans are heavier now than they were in the 70s. So I think that's a big deal. We know that barefoot running increases load weight on the foot, increases tibial vertebral accelerations. It increases load on the ankle, but decreases load on the knee. And it's also more metabolically efficient. So as barefoot running, this guy, if I'm ever going to do a barefoot race, I'm going to go as the other barefoot caveman. Now, Pam, are you going to start selling this? You going to start selling this in the store here now? So if they want to, this is a caveman outfit. He has a bow around his neck and everything. Man palm. So my opinion is that barefoot running is better. I think that it can be done. It may be better for a few people, but the majority of the population being habitually shod with grown-up shoes is going to be a difficult transition. And if you're going to do it, go slow, find a soft surface, and use it maybe once or twice a week instead of every run. That'd be my opinion, because I don't want to see you guys get injured. Race results clearly show that the faster runners are wearing shoes, but we don't know why they're wearing shoes. We don't know if it's because they're getting money, or because they're worried about getting injured, or because they can take a longer stride. We don't know. And this barefoot running movement that I've been interviewed 7 or 8 times on, I've been interviewed for a book about running, I've been interviewed in the New York Times and Boston Globe on this, is that what I call it is a virtual movement. There's a lot of people talking about it, but you go to the races and you go to the running trails and you see very, very few people doing it here in Sacramento, where it's a warm weather climate. let alone a place like Montana or North Dakota in the winter. So, I think we're talking about it because it's a neat concept. I think people are running minimalist shoes, or racing flats as I call them, but you really don't see a lot of people doing it. A lot of people are talking about it. And
In high school, I definitely try and do some barefoot running after workouts, just jogging on the grass, strengthening your feet. I definitely feel like it has its time and place. With that said, I just urge people to be cautious with it, because our feet are not the same as Africans. We grew up wearing shoes on pavement, and we have pavement roads everywhere, So what I tell people is, just work into it slowly, because I have been around a lot of people who are like, oh, I love these shoes, they're so awesome, barefoot shoes, and then they are injured a week later. So you just got to be cautious and let your feet adjust to that gradually. But my personal take on it, and this is just my opinion, I don't want to offend anyone out there, but it's just that the best guys in the world are wearing shoes and we're running fast. So until some barefoot dude comes by me at 26 miles, then maybe I'll look into it.
That pretty much sums up my, of course, I'm a little biased because I was a competitive runner. I'm not very fast now, but I was a competitive runner. That's the way I think. Obviously, there are those who are just out to lose weight. There are those out to just get fit. And so those concerns of running on. And you guys, this Boston Marathon, 2:04:54. Oh, that's incredible. That's just unworldly to have these guys. And he was, I think, number 3 or 4 in the race? 4. He was, yeah, so they had the perfect conditions for this year's Boston. But anyway, so, I'm obviously a little bit biased because I ran in shoes, I ran fast in shoes, I ran barefoot also. I've been looking at, I've been a running shoe fanatic ever since I was a junior high school kid, seeing it from the 70s to now, seeing, what's at Fleet Feet, see what's in the runner's world. And I just want to caution you, if you're going to be, just don't jump on the train and get run over. I want you, if you're going to go and want to run in the Vibrams or you're going to run barefoot, start slow. Don't hurt yourself. We see a lot of stress fractures occurring from the Vibrams and the Midfoot. So you've got to understand, it's a totally different style of shoes. What we see is that the guys who can transition into the barefoot running the easiest are the guys that grew up barefoot. Maybe they're from Hawaii, or they maybe were. I did the Runner's World interview back in February of 2010 with this guy named Barefoot Ken Bob Sackton. He had grown up in the country, walking barefoot all the time. So his transition to barefoot running was easy because he grew up. Here, I grew up in Sacramento, and I would almost never walk on the asphalt or cement barefoot because my feet were sensitive. So I like shoes because they protect my feet. So if you guys are barefoot people all your life, you may be able to run barefoot. I say go for it. Just be careful. But don't get caught up into the hype of the barefoot running thing. There's a lot of people who almost take it as a religion, that it's like, oh, I found this, I want you to find it too, whatever they're chanting. I actually don't understand this. I'm just concerned as a medical professional that you guys go on and run and have fun and run fast and do it in a way that, so you don't get injured and just don't believe everything you read on the internet. So with that in mind, we can take some questions here.
So for those of us who are looking for something different from knee injuries, what do you suggest in shoes then?
Well, that's not an easy question because knee injuries is, when you say a knee injury, that can be about 50 different things. So, is it an internal derangement knee, you got a bad medial meniscus, meniscal tear, congemalation patella, iliotibial band syndrome, Pezon's rhinitis bursitis. You know what I'm saying? Is that when I look at a knee injury as a sports podiatrist, I got to know which knee injury it is. So it's a little difficult to answer. However, first thing is, what I would do if I had a knee injury is, number one, try to find a softer surface to run on. Grass, all-weather track, treadmill with a nice spring to it, because anytime you decrease shock through the foot, that's going to decrease shock through the knee. Second thing is try differently. If you have a pronated foot, you may try one of the over-the-counter insoles. If you have a loose pronated foot, you may have to try an orthotic. You may have to, there's just so many things. It could be taking stride lengths. I could look at your run and say you're overstriding, tell you to run differently, and your knee pain goes away. Strengthen the quads. So it's, shoe-wise, though, I would say try different shoes. So, don't be afraid to, the guys here at Fleet Feet do a great job, but, I don't know any more than they do what shoe's going to work best for you. I have a good idea, but I'm not, all knowing. So you may have to try different styles of shoes and just give them a go. So maybe buy a shoe, maybe try a shoe with a low heel and one with a more controlling, motion control shoe. But it's that's why when I have someone who asks me about that question, I say, go see someone who knows sports injuries and let them evaluate you professionally so they can give you a good starting place. Because otherwise the options are so great that it's going to be difficult for you, especially if you're a new runner and a beginning runner, to know kind of where to go.